Sean here with BaseMint Comics, and this episode is going to be all about Cornerbox Classics, where I will be talking about the books that I would have pedaled up to the shop to pick up on the week of March 2nd, 1982. So first up out of that is a classic. This is Amazing Spider-Man number 229, Nothing Can Stop the Juggernaut. Obviously released on March 2nd, 1982. It was written by Roger Stern with pencils by John Romita Jr., inks by Jim Mooney, letters by Joseph Rosen, and colors by Glennis Wein. So this issue is I've talked often about how I did a very extensive X-Men kind of I have this spreadsheet that not only puts all of the X-Men stuff in continuity kind of order and to read it to get the most out of it, but it also sort of pulls in anything kind of X-Men adjacent. Obviously I consider Juggernaut to be mainly a X-Men protagonist, but this two-parter here is a fantastic Juggernaut story, and I have pretty good fond memories of this back probably 14 or 15 years ago now, when I'm no longer on Twitter, or X. It was Twitter at the time, so I'll probably just refer to it as that. There was a group of fellas that I had met that were big Spider-Man fans, and there's an issue of Web of Spider-Man, issue number 38, I believe. I think I've actually talked about it on the channel, because was I doing the channel when I went to Motor City? I might not have. I might have been, yeah, I wasn't. Fabian Nicieza had written an issue of Web of Spider-Man where Pete goes to a party and gets drunk and then has to fight Hobgoblin. And so there was this Twitter hashtag on Twitter called Drunk Pete, where these guys would get together every Saturday night and have a beer and pick out an issue of Spider-Man to read. And I was always privy to this, but I didn't have every single issue of Spider-Man that they were always reading. But I remember I did partake, although I didn't drink. I was pounding back some chocolate milks. This would have been the first one that I joined in on the fun, and they were a very good group, and still friends with a few of them to this day via online stuff. Never had the pleasure of meeting any of them in person. And when I have Web of Spider-Man number 38 signed by pretty much the entire creative team for this, and they are all and I mean, this is people all over the world that were part of this group, not just the States, but everywhere. And so pretty much every creator that I've met who took part in that issue, when I have them sign it with the Drunk Pete hashtag, they are aware of who those cats are, which is pretty fun. So anyways, this does obviously not have to do anything with that, other than my own personal first time that I read this story would have been with those fellas. Anyways, this issue, obviously, as you can tell by the cover, deals with the Juggernaut. Madam Web has a vision that she is going to be attacked by some type of creature, and reaches out to Peter to let him know that this is going on. Then it kind of cuts to Black Tom, and Black Tom Cassidy is working with Juggernaut. It's a very well-known duo in comics, and Tom has come up with the idea that hey, if we get this precognitive woman on our side, nothing will ever stop us, because we'll know what's coming. This is a great bit of work here where Juggernaut is tired of being on the boat to get there, so he just jumps off and then kind of lumbers through underwater to go get Madam Web, and she kind of gets a better handle on who is coming to get her. We cut to Pete at the Daily Bugle. He's all of a sudden Betty Brant shows back up. She's back on the scene, and I am constantly, every time that I read Spider-Man, reminded how wonderful the supporting cast of that title is, and how like he has a supporting cast now in the new books, and I'm enjoying the current run of Amazing Spider-Man. But man, I do miss there being like a real life element to it, and not it just being like threat after threat after threat after threat or event or anything. Like I kind of miss these moments of breath between the action and the for lack of a better term, soap opera angle of it. Like one of the things that I miss most in the X-Men is how many humans were like part of their thing. You know, Stevie Hunter being like a dance instructor in Westchester for Kitty and stuff like that. You know, Moira being a human before all that went south with Krakoa. So just, you know, some slice of life stuff with like the gang at the Bugle, you know, kind of reconnecting. And then Pete, obviously, while he's there, gets another call from Madam Web, and he goes after Juggernaut. And this process of kind of reading everything from the beginning in the 60s, and I'm obviously all the way up to March of 1982, has been really cool to see. One of like the benefits of this has been kind of seeing moments where you're like, oh wow, this is the first time that these characters, who like when I started reading comics were all very familiar, but in this instance, like this is the first time that Spider-Man ever even comes across the Juggernaut, and it's actually pretty kind of interesting to see. And there's been a lot of that, obviously, since I've been reading everything from you know, the beginning of the Silver Age of Marvel. I've run across quite a few, like, you know, first time The Thing, and, you know, like just a lot of like first meetings of characters that I'm just used to knowing each other has been kind of a pretty great thing. Romita's pencils are fantastic in this. Just a lot of Spider-Man trying to stop Juggernaut and, you know, not doing a bang up job of it. He reaches back out to Madam Web while all this is going on and is like, please, like, this is not something that I can, like, Juggernaut is out of my wheelhouse. You should probably contact the Avengers or the Fantastic Four. And she's like, nope, no can do. It's up to you. He winds up like running into going to Doctor Strange, see if there's because he's like, oh, Cyttorak, like this dude's affected by Cyttorak. That's a Strange thing, so he goes there. Strange isn't around, so Wong's like, nothing we can do to help you. And eventually, like Juggernaut does wind up finding Madam Web, but she is like, she's seated in kind of a life support system that she needs to be in. So he kind of like pulls her out of that, very Juggernaut-like, haphazardly, with no real concern for what's happening to her, and yanks her out of it, and realizes like, oh, he almost like throws her away, where he like pulls her out of this, realizes she's about to die, and then is like, oh, he's no good to us. She's no good to us if she's dead, and just kind of throws her aside. Pete resuscitates her. You know, an ambulance shows up, puts her on some life support, and she's taken to the hospital. And that's when Pete is like, all right, like now he's pissed. Before he was just trying to stop it, but he's like, I failed Madam Web in this. She almost died because I couldn't do this. So now I'm taking the Juggernaut down. And that's where this issue ends. And like I said, it's a fantastic two-part story, just Pete trying to stop the Juggernaut. A lot of fun. Have always enjoyed this one. So up next, Captain America number 270, Someone Who Cares, released March 2nd, 1982, written by J.M. DeMatteis, pencils by Mike Zack, inks by John Beatty, letters by James Novak, and colors by Bob Sharon. So for me, what got me to like complete this run of Cap from like the late 100s, basically up to like the end of like 1996, you know, Heroes Reborn, Onslaught, all that type of stuff, is I had like read a one-off issue that I had just kind of happenstance from this era, and just loved it. And what I loved, this goes back to the Spider-Man and the X-Men supporting cast thing. There was this time period where Cap like moves out of Avengers Mansion, moves into a brownstone, and you meet like this cast of characters that he knows there. You know, there's Bernie Rosenthal who he starts dating. There's a couple guys. One guy's a firefighter. You know, you just get. There's a woman who lives in the building who's kind of like the mother caretaker of like the younger generations that's in the building, and she's a Holocaust survivor. And it's just this interesting group of characters that Steve, like the Cap stuff is fun, but I'm almost enjoying the Steve Rogers slice of life, man at a time angle during this run just as much, if not more, than the actual Captain America super heroics of it all. So I joke that like my run of Captain America is built around Bernie Rosenthal, where like this is kind of where I dive in and like this relationship with Steve. And so it opens up, you know, Bernie in the last issue dropped the old I love you bomb on Steve, and he kind of wasn't ready for that because she doesn't know that he's Cap, and that's kind of the secret that he's holding on to. So she's kind of like talking to him, like they're walking home from somewhere, and she's kind of like, hey, I know that I did that to you, but you know, my bad, and if it's going to take you longer to say that, that's okay. I don't want to split up because you're feeling like rushed into that, blah, blah. And as they're doing this, a few issues ago, there was a guy when they were coming out of a movie who thought he recognized Steve but didn't say anything to him. And this guy shows up, and he's like, as they're having this heart-to-heart on the front stoop of their brownstone. And he's like, are you Steve Rogers? And so Steve has like a, oh my God, my cover's blown look on his face. And then explains that this dude is like, oh, hey, Bernie, this guy's a friend of my dad's. You know, like kind of one of those things. His name's Arnie Roth. And so Bernie, recognizing that there's something going on here, is just like, hey, Steve, we'll talk later. You hang out with this fella. And like Arnie is basically like, hey, man, sorry. You know, didn't want to blow your cover, but you came up with that friend of your dad's thing pretty quickly. And then it cuts to, like, you realize that Arnie and Steve have been friends since they were kids before the super soldier project. And, you know, Arnie was a bit of a street tough, looked out after Steve, kind of a ladies' man, you know, now a little bit down in his luck. They both met each other again in the military when Steve had buffed up, and obviously like post super soldier project or Project Rebirth. And so they're kind of going through this flashback. There's an interlude here where one of the young watchers, like a little group of kids that are kind of keeping track of the neighborhood, I've talked about them before, and one of them gets shot and presumably killed. And then it kind of ends that interlude. Then you're back at Steve's place, and Arnie's telling him about how basically he's been rooming with a guy named Michael, and Arnie got himself in some trouble, so they kidnapped Michael to make him have to pay this thing. And so he was kind of hoping like, hey, could I have my buddy Captain America go and mess them up? And so Steve is like, hey, I can go look into this. Cuts to Bernie, who sees kind of a homeless woman getting antagonized by some kids, harassed on the street by some kids. Bernie winds up shooing away the kids. Cuts back to Arnie and Michael showing up to this place where they've obviously got his buddy Michael. And that's when Arnie spills the beans, where he's like, I let these guys know that I know Cap. And this is a trap. And he's like, and I feel like a heel for doing this to you. Like, you know, this is how low I've sunk since the old days that and Steve's like, hey man, don't worry about it. Like, we're going to get this all figured out. And so, you know, eventually they're attacked by this big thing. It's not really like a robot. It's kind of weird, you know, you get your Cap action here. And Arnie is really hell-bent on getting his buddy Michael back, to the point where I was like, I think there's something else going on here that between these two fellas, that they couldn't really, like, they're roommates, that they couldn't really get into maybe in the comics in 1982, but these two clearly care about each other. And I was like, maybe, it's like they couldn't openly do this in the comics in 1982, but me reading this in 2025, I'm like, yeah, they're roommates. They're not roommates. This dude, like, they're not roommates. So then we cut back to Bernie. She's helping this homeless woman to, like, the place that she's staying at. And the homeless woman winds up, like, pulling a knife on her. And Bernie's like, fuck. Kills, and eventually the homeless lady, like, drops the knife. And everything's fine. But Bernie came pretty close to getting sliced and diced. So, while Cap's taking on this robot thingy that's never quite clearly explained, Arnie gets away and lets Michael loose, but Michael, like, slumps over. And when he does, the robot thingy does too. And then it, like, disintegrates as it calls out for Arnie. And you realize that, like, oh man, the two were connected. But then the Michael guy just, like, wakes up and shows up and goes and hugs his roommate Arnie. And that's where it ends. And it felt like it was a really good issue, but it felt like it wrapped up like there was something else going on at play here. And I think it's probably that this robot thing or something, or whoever these bad guys were, probably it's a seed being planted for later on in the Cap run. Maybe. I don't know, because I haven't read it yet. But that's sort of how it felt. It just felt like it was wrapped up pretty quickly. And so, Arnie and Michael hug. They go back to, their place, roommates. And then Steve goes back to his place and he knocks on Bernie's door. And the two of them hug. Obviously, she's had a rough day. Cap's had a rough day. And they'll probably continue their conversation. So it was a good issue. Like I said, kind of interesting to see the 1982 angle there between Arnie and Michael. And yeah, like I said, wrapped, like, Spider-Man, definitely the standout of those two. I still really enjoyed that issue, but it felt like it was wrapped up way too quickly. Up next, Doctor Strange number 52, Land of the Pharaohs, released March 2nd, 1982, written by Roger Stern. Pencils are by William Marshall Rogers, with inks by Terry Austin, letters by James Novak, and colors by Bob Sharon. And the interesting thing about this issue is that this obviously, you can tell the Fantastic Four appear in here, but not in the way that you think they do. Strange is actually going through time to track down Morgan Le Fay. And so you get a point of view from Fantastic Four number 19 in this. And then years later, we will revisit this issue again in 1987 in West Coast Avengers number 22. So this one will then riff on that Doctor Strange issue and Fantastic Four number 19, all because of a Doctor Doom time platform, because that's what's going on here. Like, Strange is working with, he's not really working, like, he's been contacted by Nightmare because if, like, Morgan Le Fay isn't located, like, the world won't be able to dream anymore. So he's been going through time trying to find Morgan Le Fay, and he winds up in the land of pharaohs. And as he's doing that, that's when he sort of stumbles across the Fantastic Four, and you kind of get this, like, Kirby-esque angle of that's what was going on with the Fantastic Four. And there's some stuff, like, in the issue of Fantastic Four number 19, like, Ben is on, like, a row ship, like, as the Thing, and then just somehow turns into regular old Ben Grimm so he can slip out of his manacles and start beating up those guys to save the day. And in this, that, like, scene is shown from Strange's perspective, where he puts a spell on him. So I thought that was pretty cool to finally kind of get, like, a bit of an answer to that, so that you kind of see more of the Fantastic Four angle of all of that. And of course, during all of this, like, Clea on like the B storyline is having this whole like she ran into somebody else with Strange that clearly like has feelings for Strange. Might even be Morgan at that point, and she feels like she doesn't love Steven as much as this person does, so she's not worthy of him. So she winds up basically just getting out of here at the end of that issue, which is like weird, but obviously, you know, paying sort of like this sort of leaves Steven alone with Wong in the Sanctum Sanctorum, and the next issue starts off a new creative team. So I'm sure this was kind of like talked about in the last, like when I talked about Doctor Strange last, about how there was that Frank Miller run that was supposed to happen but didn't, and so a lot of this probably has to be like really kind of thrown together rather quickly to cover up what I can only imagine was stuff that had been planned but then didn't come to fruition when Frank Miller didn't become the penciler of Doctor Strange. So still a super fun issue, particularly more interesting if you've read that Fantastic Four number 19, and I'm kind of curious when I eventually weave West Coast Avengers into the Corner Box Classics and I get to issue number 22, I'm kind of interested to see what that angle adds to both Fantastic Four number 19 and Doctor Strange number 53. So, up next, Micronauts number 42, Knave, Thy Name is Nemesis, released on March 2nd, 1982, written by Bill Mantlo with pencils by Gil Kane, inks by Daniel Bulanati, letters by Diane Albers, and colors by Bob Sharon. And as you know, if you've been following along, I got my Micronauts collection complete during this, so I'm actually reading it from the beginning, but also like I'm kind of meeting in the middle here with this, so I'm getting plenty of spoilers in this. So this is just more of the same of the Micronauts trying to make their way through our world and get back to the microverse, and Bug is having these, all of a sudden he starts having these flashes of an insectoid woman that he can't get off of his mind, and it turns out that that is Wasp. And so then it cuts to Wasp having some type of party, and this guy shows up, this creepy dude shows up at the party, and he's like, I'm gonna bust in there and I'm gonna mess Wasp up, and I'm gonna steal a suit that Hank Pym made of adamantium. And so it turns out to be this cat named Dr. Nemesis, and in the little editorial bubble here, it says, first and only seen in Marvel feature number 10. And when I read that, I was like, hey, in that collection, I happen to have all those Marvel feature issues, 1 through 12 of that series. So I was like, let me go grab Marvel feature number 10, and let me give this a read so I am more familiar with Dr. Nemesis. So that's me doing my editorial homework. He was an AIM scientist. He figured out how to shrink down by stealing some of Pym's stuff. It's a whole thing. You know, he breaks in there, tries to steal the suit. The Micronauts show up because he's again seeing Janet in pain. And then it turns into a whole battle between them and Dr. Nemesis, but they also need to get super microscopic to be able to go back to the microverse. So there's part of them that are like, hey, we should help this woman who's being attacked, but if this guy blasts us and we go super small, we get to go back to where we want to be. So we kind of need this. And this is a trope that I'm noticing, is that Janet is always not in her costume when she has to shrink down to Wasp size, so she is always naked. So Dr. Nemesis is obviously attacking all of them. The Micronauts wind up giving her something to cover herself with, and they all go to fight Dr. Nemesis, and he winds up blasting Marionette and Bug, and eventually himself and Acroyear kind of all out to where, we don't know. I'm assuming the Microverse, because I don't think that they just disintegrated 3 members of the Micronauts in one issue, but who knows? Maybe they did. I don't know if this is a Transformers the movie where they're trying to make more toys and they just got people off the table, or what. But it was an interesting one and done issue, made more interesting by the fact that I was immediately able to figure out who the main bad guy was and have his backstory. So the last issue released that I would have picked up if I had pedaled up to my comic shop on March 2nd, 1982, is Thor number 320, Blake's Menagerie, released March 2nd, 1982, written by Doug Mensch, pencils by Keith Pollard, inks by Chick Stone, letters by Diana Albers, and colors by George Roussos. So this one's kind of an interesting one. Follows up on the last issue where Don Blake is now based out of Chicago. So he goes to a museum on like Vikings with, I believe her name is Shauna, like someone that he went to medical school with. She's based out of Chicago, so it sort of seems to be a relationship budding between the two. But Blake is like the Viking thing in the museum, like the displays, is making him homesick for Asgard. And so she's like, all right, let's get out of here. But they're looking at this silver chalice, and you get a flash of like 5 characters, and then it kind of disappears. And so Blake goes back to his new office. He's going to meet his first few patients, and he's doing interviews this day. And so a woman shows up to interview for a nurse position, and she winds up in his office turning into one of those Norse gods that you saw in the chalice really quickly. And then his first patient and Shauna both turn into some Norse gods too. And it's like pretty much the first 5 people that Donald Blake runs into turn into these Norse gods. Or Norse creatures. I'm not necessarily certain that they're gods. Hilarity ensues because this obviously causes some issues in the building as this is going on. So like the landlord shows up, and this all sort of feels like 1980s Donald Blake played by Tom Hanks, like a little bit of buffoonery going on, not really like super Thor stuff. It's just like these gods are like, ooh, we've been trapped in this chalice forever. We want to go out on the town. And like Blake can't, like he can't, because he's got to like run his business, but also doesn't want to lose sight of these characters and doesn't want them to know that he's Thor. They kind of figure it out because he's like, oh, what if the human side of them still know? I don't want Shauna to know this. So they wind up knocking him out and like going out in the town, and they wind up getting in a bar brawl. And, you know, like I said, it's very much 80s hijinks of like, there's these Norse gods running around, just kind of running into people. Blake eventually wakes up, turns into Thor, goes after him, and finally gets them to like agree, like, hey, you guys need to go back. And so the main one, Kyrie, who is like taken over for Shauna, lets Thor knows that like there was before, like in the Odin, like before you were even around, there was a Rim Thurser was one of the gods in Odin or in Asgard, and he basically like they were part of his menagerie, and he wound up killing all of them and trapping their souls in this chalice. And so they're like, we really don't want to go back in here, even if we're like we've been in there forever. We don't want to go back in here. And he's kind of like, hey, I'll take the chalice back to Asgard and we'll try to figure this out. But you can't inhabit mortals, and you can't be here because you guys are going to mess them up. And they're not like Asgardian. They can't just like, can't have at it and mess them up. You'll kill them. And so he goes to like blast him back into the chalice, and it kind of bounces off and drives one of them crazy. So he fights Thor, but eventually calms down, and they realize that like for some odd reason they can't get put back in the chalice, and they're like, there's some type of sorcery. It's been, you know, ensorcelled or whatever. And that's when they realize like there must be another Asgardian who's messed this. And Thor's like, Loki, So that's where it ends. So clearly, like, Loki has done something to this, so these Asgardian characters are stuck here. So that is this week's episode of Corner Box Classics, covering books that I would have picked up on March 2nd, 1982. So up next will be a normal, like, Wednesday ride, but it probably won't be on Wednesday. I am obviously going to get my books, but I have like a work meeting that I have to do at a weird time during the day, and then I have to immediately leave that work meeting, and we're taking Henry to his first ever hockey game, and so I kind of obviously, like, that's way more important than comics, and I want to lock in on that. So there's probably going to be something Tuesday where I do like the last week's pick of the week, maybe if I can get the next week's books read in time. Anyways, here's the thing. This week is weird because I have plans on Wednesday. The following week is weird because it's Christmas Eve. So there might be 2 weeks here where things are either like a day early or a day late. And it's the holidays. Things happen. Everything's cool. So with that said, I will be around. Just might not be exactly on Wednesday. So yeah, just wanted to mention that. And if you are enjoying what you're doing, I have been slowly but surely getting new subscribers, and I'm kind of like, every time, I don't want to have more videos on the platform than subscribers, and I'm like, it's constantly this. So, you know, a few more wouldn't hurt. And let me know, any of these, have you read any of these Corner Box Classics? Let me know what you think of them. Were there ones that you liked more than I did? Are there books in here that you've never read before but now you're interested in? Am I giving too much of them away? Do I need to tighten up the ship and maybe edit a little bit of this? Who knows? Anyways, comment, like, and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. It would help grow the channel. And yeah, I will be back with the books I liked from last week in the next video, and maybe some Corner Box Classics because I won't have my new books yet. So I will see you in a couple days. Thanks for watching. Bye.